Have you ever stopped to think about how many secrets are buried in places no one wants to go? In those dark basements, in those abandoned houses that everyone avoids passing by. Sometimes those places hold much more than dust and old furniture. They hold truths, and the story you are about to hear is living proof that some discoveries can change everything you believe about your own life. When Marcus Jenkins accepted the cleaning job at that abandoned mansion in Connecticut, he was just trying to pay the bills. A simple job, one of those he'd done dozens of times before. But there was something different about that house. Everyone else on the team refused. The property had a grim reputation in town, whispers of an entire family that vanished without a trace in 1994. But Marcus needed the money, and fear never pays the bills, right? In the first few days, everything seemed normal. Dust, covered furniture, the typical smell of a place forgotten by time. Until he went down to the basement. That dark and damp basement that the real estate agent specifically asked him to leave for last. And it was there, in that suffocating silence, that everything began to crumble. Have you ever felt that chill that warns you something isn't right? Marcus sensed it, especially when he found the scratch marks on the back wall, as if someone had desperately tried to scratch their way out. What he found hidden behind that false wall wasn't just an archaeological discovery or a forgotten treasure. It was the answer to a mystery that had haunted an entire family for 3 decades, a secret so deep, so disturbing, that someone needed to literally hide it within the walls. And here's the part that will leave you breathless. The key that unlocked everything had been with Marcus all along, hanging around his neck since childhood, without him ever knowing its significance. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what you're about to discover isn't just about Marcus, that mansion or that missing family. It's about how sometimes the past we seek is closer than we imagine, waiting in the most unlikely place to be revealed. And when the truth finally comes out, it completely transforms who we are. Before I continue telling you every detail of this chilling story, I need to ask you something. If you're feeling the same curiosity I felt when I discovered this story, if your heart is already racing, wanting to know what comes next, leave a comment below telling me what has touched you the most so far. Seriously, I read all the comments, and it's amazing how each of you brings a different perspective, a similar experience, a feeling that connects us. Sometimes you think you're alone in a situation, but when you see in the comments that other people have also gone through something similar, everything changes, right? And look, your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. When you leave a like, you're not just enjoying a video, you're telling the algorithm that real and moving stories like this deserve to be seen by more people. You're helping someone else who needs to hear this today to find this video. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and activate the bell, because every week I bring you stories that will make you feel, reflect, and believe that life is much more incredible and mysterious than we imagine. I know this topic resonates with you. I feel it too. So, leave a comment below. Have you ever had a discovery that completely changed your perspective on something? A moment when you found an answer where you least expected it? Tell us about it. Create that connection, because this isn't just a channel. It's a community of people who believe that every story deserves to be heard. Now let's go back to the mansion in Connecticut, to the dark basement, where Marcus was about to discover that his entire life had been built on a mystery he never imagined. Marcus Jenkins was 42 years old when all this happened. He wasn't a man of grand ambitions or extraordinary dreams. He was just someone who woke up early, worked hard, and came home at the end of the day. His life was simple, predictable, and he liked it that way. He had been cleaning abandoned properties for over 15 years and had seen it all. Rat-infested houses, mold-covered mansions, places where families had simply gotten up and left overnight. But when the phone rang that Tuesday in March, and the voice on the other end offered him the job at the old Whitmore mansion, something inside him hesitated. The transformation that was about to happen in Marcus's life began at that very moment, with that seemingly insignificant decision to answer a call. Whitmore Mansion had a reputation that echoed through the streets of Connecticut for decades. Everyone in town knew the story, or at least a version of it. In 1994, the Whitmore family disappeared. They didn't run away, they didn't leave a note, they didn't tell anyone. They simply vanished. The car was still in the garage, clothes in the closets, food in the refrigerator beginning to rot. Authorities investigated for months, but never found a body, a concrete clue, nothing. The house remained there, frozen in time, like a hidden truth that no one could decipher. No one wanted to buy it, no one wanted to go inside. They said it was haunted, that noises could be heard at night, that the energy of the place was too heavy. When the call came to Marcus's team, everyone refused. One by one, his colleagues invented excuses, commitments, health problems, anything. The journey that no one wanted to take was there, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough. Marcus was on the desperate side. The bills were piling up, the rent was overdue, and he couldn't afford to turn down work. When she saw the photo of the property the realtor had emailed, a chill ran down her spine. The mansion was immense, Victorian style, with dark windows that looked like empty eyes staring back at anyone who dared look back. There was something disturbing about that image, something his intuition screamed at him to ignore. But his survival instinct prevailed. He accepted the job. Sometimes the most important decisions in our lives are made not out of courage, but out of necessity. And it was precisely one of those decisions that put Marcus on the path to a revelation that would change everything. Because when Marcus first set foot in that mansion, he had no idea that he was entering not just a cleaning job, but the very history that had been hidden from him, his entire life. On his third day of work, Marcus had already cleaned most of the mansion. The living room with its furniture covered in ghostly white sheets, the upstairs bedrooms where framed portraits of smiling faces that never returned still hung, the kitchen where time stood still in 1994. Each room told a silent story of interrupted lives. But there was one place he had been avoiding almost unconsciously: the basement. The real estate agent had been very clear on that point. Leave the basement for last, Marcus. Focus on the rest of the house first. At the time, he didn't question it. Now, standing before that heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway, with its rusty doorknob creaking at the touch, he understood that that instruction wasn't just about work organization, it was a warning, the complete. Transformation of his journey was about to begin there, at that moment of decision between opening that door or simply leaving. Marcus took a deep breath and turned the doorknob. The door groaned as if protesting against being disturbed after so long. The stairs descended into total darkness, and each creaking wooden step seemed to scream beneath his feet, announcing its presence to the void below. He turned on his flashlight, but the light seemed swallowed by the dense darkness that awaited him. He descended slowly, one step at a time, and with each step he felt the temperature drop. The air was different there, dense, heavy, still, as if nothing had breathed in that space for decades. It was the kind of atmosphere that makes you realize you are entering territory not only abandoned, but forgotten by time itself. When his feet finally touched the concrete floor of the basement, Marcus shone his flashlight around. The beam of light revealed boxes stacked chaotically, furniture covered in dusty cloths that had lost their original color, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling like macabre curtains. Family photos were scattered across the floor, as if someone had knocked everything over in a hurry. He bent down and picked one up. It was a photo of a complete family, father, mother, and what appeared to be their teenage daughter, all smiling during a picnic. The image was faded, but the smiles seemed genuine. Marcus felt a pang in his chest. These people had simply vanished from the face of the earth, and there were their faces, frozen in a moment of happiness that would never return. He began organizing the boxes, trying to focus on the work and not on the disturbing thoughts that were beginning to invade his mind. But then he saw something that made his blood run cold. On the back wall, partially hidden behind an old bookcase, there were marks. These weren't ordinary marks of wear and tear or dampness. They were scratches, deep, desperate, as if someone had used their own fingernails trying to tear through the concrete and paint. The marks ran vertically down, in irregular parallel lines, and there were so many of them that they almost formed a pattern. The impact of that sight was immediate. Marcus felt his legs weaken. This wasn't the result of an accident or natural wear and tear. It was the physical record of pure despair. Someone had been there, in that exact spot, trying to get out, or trying to get into something. He approached the wall, pushing, the bookcase aside with effort. Dust rose in clouds, making him cough. When he wiped the surface with his shirt sleeve, he realized the scratches weren't random. They circled a specific area of the wall, as if marking something, pointing to something. Marcus lightly tapped the wall with his knuckles. The sound came back hollow. His heart raced. That wall was fake. There was something behind it. The hidden truth that the entire mansion held was literally buried there, inches away. He knew he should stop, that he should call someone, that this was no longer just a cleaning job. But the mindset of someone who had spent his entire life without answers about his own past prevailed. Marcus needed to know. He needed to see what was hidden there. He searched with his flashlight for some tool he could use. In the corner of the basement, he found a rusty iron bar, probably left behind by some worker decades ago. He returned to the wall and began to tap, slowly at first, then with more force. The old plaster began to crumble, cracking and shattering. Pieces fell to the concrete floor with dry sounds that echoed through the silence. Marcus felt sweat trickling down his face, mixed with the dust that covered everything. Finally, the hole was big enough. He stuck the flashlight inside the opening, and what he saw on the other side made all the air escape his lungs. There was a door, a small rusty metal door hidden inside the wall. There was a rusty sign nailed to the metal door that simply read, "Do not open, please." Marcus read those words 3 times, as if he needed to be sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. It wasn't an aggressive order. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea, a desperate appeal from someone who knew that one day, inevitably, another person would be there, standing before that door with the same choice in their hands. The word "please" was handwritten, with ink that had run before drying completely, as if it had been written in haste, with fear, with the certainty that time was running out. Marcus felt a chill run through his entire body. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a final plea from someone who was no longer here to defend what they had hidden. The journey that had begun as a simple cleaning job was now transforming into something much bigger, something that touched on questions about choices, consequences, and the nature of the truths we prefer to keep buried. He took a few steps back, trying to process what he was seeing. His first instinct was to leave immediately, call the real estate agent, maybe even the police. But something kept him paralyzed in that dark basement. It was as if 2 voices inside his head were waging a silent battle. One told him to respect that warning, to let some secrets rest in peace. The other, louder and more insistent, whispered that perhaps that door was waiting for him, that nothing in life happens by chance, that every decision we make leads us exactly where we need to be. Marcus wasn't a spiritual or superstitious person, but at that moment, with the flashlight trembling in his hand and the silence of the basement pressing against his ears, he felt he was at a crossroads that went far beyond the physical. That's when he heard it, a low, metallic, almost imperceptible sound coming from inside the wall. Marcus stood completely still, holding his breath. Was it just the old house settling in, old pipes contracting with the change in temperature? But the sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic, deliberate, as if something were gently tapping against metal on the other side of that locked door. His heart raced. There was no one else in that house. He was absolutely certain of it. He had checked every room, every door, every window. He was completely alone, or at least he should have been. The impact of that sound was so profound that Marcus felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the wall beside him, trying to control his breathing, which was now rapid and irregular. With a trembling hand, he lightly tapped the wall, right next to the opening he had made. The sound came back hollow, confirming what I already suspected. There was an empty space inside, large enough to hide something or someone. Marcus swallowed hard and tapped again, this time harder. Silence. Nothing. He waited 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, and then the sound returned. Tap, 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 but now it came from a different place, more to the left, as if it were moving. This was impossible, totally impossible, but it was happening right in front of him. The rational mindset that Marcus had always cultivated began to crumble before the inexplicable. He knew he had to make a choice now. Either he ran down those stairs and never came back, or he broke the rest of that wall and discovered once and for all what was hidden inside. The transformation happens precisely in those moments, when we are forced to confront the unknown. Marcus picked up the iron bar again and began to strike the plaster with all his might. Dust rose in dense clouds, entering his nose and mouth, making him cough violently. But he didn't stop. He struck and struck, until large pieces of wall began to fall, revealing more and more of that rusty metal door. When he finally managed to expose the door completely, Marcus stepped back and pointed the flashlight directly at it. It was smaller than he had imagined, perhaps 1.5 meters high, as if it had been made to be hidden. Padlock that locked it was covered in rust but still seemed solid, and there, right below the warning sign, was something he hadn't seen before in the dim light. A small symbol carved into the metal, a 5-pointed star inside a circle. Marcus felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. His hands trembling uncontrollably, he pulled at the chain he had worn around his neck for as long as he could remember. The pendant hanging from it was identical. Exactly identical. A 5-pointed star inside a circle. If you're feeling that tension building, if your heart is racing, wanting to find out what comes next, subscribe to the channel now, because you're part of this revelation, and what Marcus is about to discover will connect dots that no one imagined were connected. He held the pendant and the symbol on the door, comparing them with wide eyes. There was no doubt. They were identical. And it was at that moment that Marcus understood something terrible and liberating at the same time. That door wasn't waiting for just anyone. It was waiting specifically for him. That door wasn't waiting for just anyone. It was waiting specifically for him. Marcus should have stopped there. He should have left that basement, called the real estate agent, explained what he had found, and let other people handle it. He should have called the police, the fire department, any authority that could take responsibility for that discovery. But he did none of that. Because sometimes, when you're faced with something that can completely change your understanding of who you are, curiosity isn't just stronger than fear. It becomes a visceral need, an impulse as powerful as breathing itself. Marcus needed to know. He needed to understand why that symbol, that star inside the circle he'd carried on his chest since childhood, without knowing where it came from, was marked on a locked door inside a house where an entire family had disappeared decades ago. He climbed the basement stairs, his legs still trembling, and began to search. The transformation happening inside him was almost palpable. He was no longer the man who had entered that house 3 days ago just to do a job. He was someone who had just touched on something deeply personal, something that connected his unknown past with this disturbing present. Marcus searched every room in the mansion with an almost obsessive determination. He opened drawers, rummaged through cabinets, looked under beds and inside closets. He was looking for keys. There had to be keys somewhere. People don't lock doors with padlocks and simply throw the keys away. They keep them, hide them, leave clues so that someone can find them when the time is right. It was in the second-floor office that he finally found it. There was an old dark wood desk against the wall, covered in a thick layer of dust that had accumulated over 3 decades. Marcus slowly opened the central drawer, and it creaked in protest. Inside, among yellowed papers, hand-dried pens, was a small bunch of keys held together by a rusty metal ring. He picked up the keys carefully, as if he were holding something sacred. There were 4 in total, all old, of different shapes, each probably opening a different secret of that house. His hands trembled so much that the keys clinked against each other, producing a metallic clinking that broke the oppressive silence. Marcus descended the stairs back to the basement. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if gravity were increasing as he approached that door. When he reached it again, he took 3 deep breaths, trying to calm his heart, which was pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to burst out of his chest. He knew he was about to cross a line. He knew that once he opened that door, there would be no turning back, no way to unknow whatever was hidden on the other side. His self-preservation instinct screamed at him to stop, but the journey of discovery had already gone too far to be interrupted now. With trembling fingers, Marcus tried the first key. It didn't fit the lock. The second didn't either. He felt a moment of frustration, almost panic. What if none of those keys worked? What if he'd found the wrong bunch? But then he put in the third key, and it slid perfectly into the lock's mechanism. Marcus turned it slowly, feeling the initial resistance of the rusty metal. For a second, he thought it wouldn't work, that the rust had welded everything together. But then he felt the click. That sound echoed through the empty basement like a gunshot, reverberating off the concrete walls. The lock opened. Marcus stood there for long seconds, just staring at the open padlock in his hand. The impact of what he was about to do finally hit him with full force. He took a deep breath, placed his hand on the cold metal doorknob, and pulled. The door resisted at first, its rusty hinges protesting after being idle for so long. He pulled harder, and finally it gave way with a sharp groan of metal. Against metal. A strong smell immediately invaded his nostrils. It was the characteristic smell of old paper, of mold, of time trapped, of secrets kept for too long. Marcus pointed the flashlight into the small space that had been revealed. The beam of light illuminated a secret compartment no bigger than a broom closet. But what was inside made Marcus's entire world stop spinning. There was a worn, dark brown leather-bound journal, its edges frayed by time, and around it, scattered, piled up, organized in small bundles tied with string, were hundreds of letters. Yellowed envelopes, some with old stamps still attached, others with only handwritten names on the front. Letters that were never sent, words that never reached their destination. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the diary, feeling the cold, dry leather against his skin, without imagining that on the following pages, his entire life would be rewritten. He sat on the cold concrete floor of the basement, leaned his back against the damp wall and carefully opened the diary. The pages were yellowed, some stuck together by the dampness, but the ink was still legible. On the first page, written in a delicate feminine handwriting, was the name, Elizabeth Whitmore, and just below a date, January 1994. Marcus began to read, and with each word, each sentence, each revelation, he felt as if he were descending deeper into an abyss from which there was no return. Elizabeth wrote like someone who knew. Her words needed to outlive her. They weren't just everyday notes or personal reflections. It was a testimony, a confession, a desperate record of a truth that needed to be told. In the first few pages, she described her seemingly perfect life with her husband Richard and teenage daughter, the beautiful house in Connecticut, dinners with neighbors, summer vacations. But then the tone shifted. Elizabeth was beginning to notice strange things. Her husband waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Phone calls, he answered, and quickly hung up when she entered the room. Letters arriving without a return address that he burned in the fireplace after reading. The transformation from trust to suspicion was palpable in every line Marcus read. And then came the revelation that made everything crumble. Elizabeth had found, hidden at the bottom of a locked cupboard, a box of documents. Passports with Richard's photo, but with completely different names. Birth certificates that made no sense. And letters. Dozens of letters from a woman named Sarah Brennan, all addressed to a man named James Parker. But the letters spoke of Richard. They spoke of a life he had before. They spoke of a daughter. Sarah pleaded in the letters for him to come back, saying that the girl was growing up without her father, that she deserved to know him, that the past no longer mattered. Marcus felt his hands trembling as he held the diary. Elizabeth's mind was shattering page by page, and he could feel her despair traversing time and reaching him. Richard Whitmore wasn't who everyone thought he was. That was the hidden truth Elizabeth had uncovered. He was living under a false identity. He was running from something or someone and had built his entire life on a lie. Elizabeth was writing about her confrontation with him, about how Richard finally admitted everything. He had been someone else before. He had been involved with dangerous people. He had witnessed something he shouldn't have seen. He had received death threats, and the only way out had been to disappear completely, assume a new identity, and start from scratch. But he had left behind a wife and a young daughter, Sarah and the girl, and now, after all these years, someone had found him. The following pages of the diary grew increasingly frantic, Elizabeth's handwriting less careful, more hurried. She wrote about strange cars slowly passing in front of the house, about phone calls where no one spoke on the other end of the line, about Richard saying they might need to run away again, start all over again somewhere else. But Elizabeth was tired of lies, tired of living looking over her shoulder. She had created that secret hiding place in the basement, had started documenting everything, because she had a terrible feeling that something bad was about to happen. The impact of reading those words was devastating. Marcus was literally holding the last recorded thoughts of a woman who knew she was in danger. And then she reached the last diary entry. The date was October 28, 1994. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible in places. Elizabeth wrote, "They're here. I just saw a black car stopped across the street. Richard is upstairs with our daughter, locked in the bedroom. He told me to take this and hide it. He told me that if something happens, if anyone ever finds this diary, that person needs to know the truth. They need to find Sarah Brennan in Portland. She deserves to know what happened. She deserves to know the truth about her daughter." And there the entry ended, abruptly, as if Elizabeth had heard something and needed to run to hide the diary before it was too late. Marcus closed the book, his hands trembling so much he almost dropped it. He picked up one of the letters from the pile next to him. The envelope was addressed to James Parker, but the address had been crossed out and corrected to Richard Whitmore. He carefully opened it and took out the thin sheets of paper inside. The letter was from Sarah, dated 1993. If you're feeling that lump in your throat, that need to know how it all connects, subscribe to the channel now, because you're part of this journey of revelation, and what Marcus will discover in the next letters will show that this whole story was much closer to him than anyone could have imagined. Marcus began reading Sarah's words, and with each line he felt the ground disappear beneath him, because this story was no longer just about the Whitmore family. Sarah wrote with a pain that pierced the paper. She spoke of the love she had for James, of how he had disappeared one night without explanation, leaving only a note saying he needed to leave to protect her. She was pregnant when he left, alone, scared, not knowing if he was alive or dead. The letter begged him to come back, said that their daughter had been born, that she was beautiful, that she had his eyes. Sarah wrote that she didn't care what he had done or who he was running from. She only wanted her daughter to know her father. Marcus read letter after letter, all saying practically the same thing with variations of despair. And then he realized something. Sarah never mentioned her daughter's name. She only said, "our girl," or "the baby," as if she were afraid to write the name, as if that would make everything too real, too painful. He put the letters aside and looked into the back of the small, secret compartment. There was also a metal box, about the size of a shoebox. Pushed into the darkest corner, Marcus pulled it out and felt its weight. There was something substantial inside. He carefully opened the rusty lid, and what he saw made his heart stop for a full second. Inside the box were meticulously organized documents, birth certificates with different names, all fake, all showing the same photo of Richard, but with completely different identities. Passports from different countries, driver's licenses. It was a complete escape kit, prepared in case they needed to disappear again. The transformation of a normal life into a ghostly existence was all documented inside that box. But there was more. Beneath the documents, Marcus found photos. They were old photos, the kind you took with analog cameras and had developed at photo shops. He spread them out on the basement floor by the light of his flashlight. They were photos of a little red-haired girl, no more than 2 or 3 years old in the pictures. She was smiling, playing, living a life that seemed happy and innocent. Marcus looked at the portraits of the Whitmore family he had seen scattered around the house. Richard and Elizabeth's daughter was brunette, with dark brown hair. This red-haired girl didn't appear in any family portraits. She wasn't part of their official life. She was from before. She was the daughter Richard had left behind when he became someone else. She was Sarah's girl. And then Marcus saw it. At the bottom of the metal box, wrapped in a faded dark blue velvet cloth, was a necklace. He picked it up with trembling fingers and unwrapped the fabric. It was a silver necklace, delicate yet sturdy, and hanging from it was a pendant in the shape of a five-pointed star inside a circle. Exactly like the symbol he had seen on the door, exactly like the pendant he himself wore. Marcus felt as if all the air had been sucked from the basement. With his free hand, he pulled the chain he had worn around his neck for as long as he could remember being a child. The only thing he had of the adoptive mother who raised him. She had said it came with him when they adopted him, that it was the only link to his biological past, that he should always keep it. He held the two pendants side by side under the flashlight. They weren't just similar. They were identical. Every detail, every curve of the star, every line of the circle that surrounded it. The impact of this discovery was so violent that Marcus felt nausea rise in his throat. His hands trembled uncontrollably. He looked again at the photos of the little red-haired girl scattered on the floor. He picked one up and brought it close to his face. The girl had light eyes, just like him. She had freckles scattered across her nose, just like he had as a child. She had that slightly crooked smile on the left side, exactly like his own smile when he looked in the mirror. Reality crashed down on Marcus with the force of an avalanche. He wasn't holding onto the story of strangers. He was holding onto the story of his own family, whom he never knew. That redhead in the photos was Sarah, the daughter Richard left behind. Sarah, who later had a son she couldn't raise alone, a son who was put up for adoption. Marcus let the photos fall from his hands. Tears began to stream down his face uncontrollably. He had come to clean an abandoned house. He had descended into a dark basement just to do his job. And he had found the answer to the question he had carried within him forever. Where did I come from? Who were my parents? Why was I abandoned? The journey that had begun 3 days ago with a simple phone call had led him to this moment, to this devastating yet liberating revelation. Marcus held the two necklaces in his hands, pressing them against his chest as if they were the most precious thing in the world, because now they were. They were no longer just pieces of metal. They were physical proof of a connection that spanned generations, linking a grandfather he never knew to a biological mother he never met, and finally to himself. Marcus wiped the tears from his face and picked up the diary again, because he knew there was still one last piece of the puzzle waiting to be found. But before returning to the diary, his eyes fell on an envelope different from the others. It was at the bottom of the pile of letters, separated, as if it had been placed there last intentionally. The envelope was addressed simply to Richard, or whoever finds this. The postmark date was 1995, a full year after the Whitmore family disappeared. Marcus felt his heart race again. With his hands still trembling, he carefully tore open the envelope and took out the pages inside. The handwriting was Sarah's, but something about it was different, heavier, more tired, as if each word had cost immense effort to write. He began to read, and the first line hit him like a punch to the gut. Richard, if you're still alive somewhere, I need you to know what happened. I need someone to know, even if you never read this. Sarah wrote about how she had seen the news of the disappearance, how she had recognized Richard's photo in the newspapers, even with the different name, even after all those years. She had traveled to Connecticut, stood outside the abandoned mansion, cried alone knowing that the man she loved was probably dead. And then she wrote about the hardest decision of her life, the transformation of a woman who struggled to hold on to hope into someone who finally had to accept reality. I had a son with you, Richard, our son. He was born 6 months after you left. For years I raised him alone, telling him stories about the father he never knew. I told him you were a hero, that you left to protect us, and I truly believed it. But when I saw that you had built a new life, a new family, and yet you never came back to us, something inside me broke. Marcus felt the tears streaming freely now. The words blurred before him. But he continued reading, because he needed to know. He needed to understand. Sarah continued, "Our son is 5 years old now. He has your eyes, Richard. Those clear blue eyes that made me fall in love with you. He has your stubbornness, your quiet way of observing everything before speaking. But I can't do this alone anymore. I have no money, no family to help. I work 2 jobs and can barely pay the rent. He deserves a better life than I can give him. So I made the most painful decision a mother can make." Marcus stopped breathing. For a second. He knew what was coming next, but he needed to read it with his own eyes for it to become real. "I put our son up for adoption. A good family, with resources, who can give him everything I can't. They will love him. They will take care of him. They will give him the opportunities he deserves. But before handing him over, I gave him something. That necklace you gave me when we found out I was pregnant. The star inside the circle. You said it was a symbol of protection, that as long as he wore it, he would be safe. I asked the adoptive family to promise that they would let him keep the necklace, that they would tell him when he grew up that he came from his biological mother. It's the only part of me and you that he will carry." Marcus couldn't hold back any longer. He fell to his knees on the cold basement floor, clutching the letter to his chest, sobbing in a way he hadn't sobbed since childhood. He was that baby. That 5-year-old boy, Sarah, had to give up because love alone doesn't pay the bills, doesn't put food on the table, doesn't guarantee a future. The adoptive family he always called Mom and Dad were good people. They had kept their promise. They had let him keep the necklace. They had told him, when he was old enough, that it came from his biological mother. But they never knew the whole story. They could never have imagined it. The impact of this revelation was overwhelming. The Whitmore family that disappeared in 1994 were no strangers. Richard was his biological grandfather. The man who had tried to escape his past, build a new life, protect his new family, but who in the process had abandoned Sarah and their daughter, and indirectly had abandoned Marcus before he was even born. Elizabeth, who had written that desperate diary, was the woman his grandfather had chosen instead of returning to Sarah. And that brunette daughter Marcus had seen in the Whitmore family photos was technically his aunt, even though they had never met. Sarah ended. The letter with words that broke Marcus's heart into even smaller pieces. "I hope that one day our son will discover who you really were, Richard. Not the man who ran away, not the coward who abandoned us, but the man who tried to protect everyone he loved, even if in the wrong way. I hope he understands that difficult decisions don't always have right answers, and I hope he will be happier than we were able to be." Marcus carefully folded the letter and held it together with the necklace. If you're heartbroken right now, feeling every emotion of this journey, subscribe to the channel because you're part of this story of redemption and discovery, and what Marcus will do with this truth will show that even from the most painful revelations, something transformative can be born. He looked around that dark basement, at all the scattered letters and photos, and knew exactly what he needed to do now. Marcus couldn't simply keep this to himself. This wasn't just his story, it was the story of people who deserved justice, who deserved to be remembered, who deserved to have their voices heard even after so much time in silence. With his hands still trembling, he picked up the phone and called the police. When the officers arrived 2 hours later, Marcus took them directly to the basement. He showed them the broken wall, the secret door, the hidden compartment. He handed over Elizabeth's diary, Sarah's letters, the forged documents, the photos. He handed over everything except the necklace he wore around his neck, that he kept because it was rightfully his. It was the only tangible inheritance he had from a family he never knew. What followed were weeks of intense investigation. The police reopened the Whitmore family disappearance case, which had been shelved for 3 decades. They brought in experts, forensic analysts, federal investigators, and slowly, piece by piece, the complete truth began to emerge from behind the scenes. Richard Whitmore, or rather James Parker, was not just a man fleeing debts or a criminal past. He had been a federal agent. He worked undercover in an operation against one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the East Coast in the 1980s. He had seen things he shouldn't have seen. He had collected evidence that could bring down very powerful people, and when the time came to testify, he knew he was signing his own death warrant. James Parker's transformation into Richard Whitmore had been official, part of the federal government's witness protection program. He received a new identity, a new story, a new life. He was relocated to Connecticut, far from everything and everyone he knew, and that included Sarah and the young daughter she was expecting. Federal agents told him it was for their own good, that if he maintained contact he would be putting them in danger. So James became Richard, met Elizabeth, built a new family, and tried to bury the past so deep it could never be found. But some pasts refused to stay buried. Investigators discovered records showing that the criminal organization against which Richard testified never stopped searching for him. It took years, but eventually they found his new identity. The records showed active surveillance of the Whitmore family in the weeks leading up to their disappearance, exactly as Elizabeth had written in her diary. Strange cars, silent phone calls, the growing feeling that they were being watched. It was all documented in the federal files that were finally opened. The impact of this revelation was immense. The Whitmore family hadn't simply run away or been kidnapped. They were tracked, found, and all indications point to them being eliminated by people Richard had helped put behind bars. Their bodies were never found, probably never will be. But now at least there was an explanation, a narrative that made sense, that connected all the dots. Elizabeth had left that secret basement as a time capsule, a last desperate attempt to ensure that if something happened to them, the truth wouldn't die with them. She had documented everything, knowing that one day, perhaps years or decades later, someone would find it. She just couldn't have imagined that this person would be the grandson Richard never met, the son of the daughter he abandoned, the last piece of a broken family trying to reconnect through time and tragedy. And the necklace? The investigators explained something to Marcus that made everything make even more sense. Sarah had given that necklace to Richard when they discovered her first pregnancy before he disappeared. It was a symbol between them, a promise of protection. When Richard became a different person and built his new family, he had a second, identical necklace made, placing it on the door of the secret compartment as a kind of marker. It was his way, perhaps unconsciously, of leaving a clue so that if something happened, the truth could be traced back to Sarah, and Sarah, years later, had given the original necklace to her son before putting him up for adoption. It was her way of ensuring that if Richard was still alive somewhere, if the boy ever crossed paths with him, there would be a way to identify him. A sign, a physical connection that could not be denied. Marcus had not only uncovered his past, he had closed a cycle of pain that spanned generations. He had given voice to people who had been silenced. He had brought to light a truth that had been buried literally and figuratively for 3 decades. The journey that began with a cleansing effort had transformed into something much greater, a mission of redemption, of connection, of healing. And there was still one last thing Marcus needed to do, one last person he needed to find to finally close this chapter. Sarah Brennan, the woman who had written those letters decades ago, the woman who had made the hardest decision of her life and put her own son up for adoption, the woman who, according to the last entry in Elizabeth's diary, lived in Portland. Marcus spent 2 weeks searching. He called dozens of numbers, consulted public records, spoke with social workers. He was almost giving up when he finally found her. Sarah Brennan, now 68 years old, still lived in Portland, in a small apartment in the city center. When Marcus called and identified himself, there was such a long silence on the other end of the line that he thought she had hung up. But then he heard a sob, and then another, and then her voice, broken with emotion, saying only, "My boy, you're alive." They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe near where Sarah lived. Marcus arrived 30 minutes early, too nervous to wait at home. When she walked through the door, he knew immediately it was her. He had seen so many old photos in the letters that he recognized her eyes, even decades older, even carrying the weight of a lifetime of regret and longing. Sarah walked to the table where he was sitting and simply stopped, looking at his face as if she were seeing a ghost. And then the tears began to fall. Marcus stood up and for the first time in his life embraced his biological mother. They stood there, in the middle of the cafe, embracing and crying, while the people around them pretended not to be observing that scene of impossible reunion. They sat down, and Marcus told them everything. He showed them Elizabeth's diary, the letters she had written to Richard, explained about the secret cellar, how he had found everything by chance, while doing his work. Sarah listened with trembling hands, wiping away the tears that wouldn't stop falling. When Marcus showed her the two necklaces, the one he wore and the one he had found in the secret door, she put her hand to her mouth and sobbed even harder. "I always wanted you to know," she said, her voice breaking. "I always hoped that one day you would look for me, that you would want to know the story. But as the years went by, I lost hope. I thought you would hate me for abandoning you." Marcus held her hand across the table. "You didn't abandon me," he said, and in that moment he realized he truly believed it. The transformation that had taken place within him throughout that journey had changed not only how he viewed his past, but how he understood the difficult decisions people are forced to make. "You gave me a chance at a better life. You gave me a family that loved and cared for me. You did what you needed to do, and I don't blame you for it." Sarah cried even harder, but now they were tears of relief, of a weight finally lifted from her shoulders after carrying it for over 40 years. They talked for hours. Sarah told him about how she had met James, about the love they shared, about the pain of seeing him disappear. She told him about the pregnancy, about raising Marcus alone for the first 5 years, about the impossible decision to put him up for adoption when she simply couldn't cope anymore. Marcus told her about his life, about his adoptive parents who were good and present, about how he always felt a piece of the puzzle was missing, but never imagined he would find it in that way. He showed her photos he had kept, told stories, and slowly, patiently, they began to build a bridge between the past and the present. The impact of that encounter was profound for both of them. Sarah finally had the chance to look into the eyes of the son she had to give up and say the words she had rehearsed thousands of times in her head, but never had. The chance to pronounce, "I'm sorry I loved you from the first second, and I never stopped." And Marcus finally had answers. He had a story. He had an origin that made sense, however painful and complicated it might be. Today, months after that day at the cafe, Marcus wears both necklaces, one on each wrist, transformed into bracelets that he never takes off. They are constant reminders of a journey that began with a job no one wanted to accept and ended with discoveries that changed his life forever. The Whitmore mansion was demolished weeks after the investigation was completed. The property was sold, and now there is a small park in its place. But Marcus kept Elizabeth's diary and all of Sarah's letters. They are in a special box in his house, preserved as the historical relics they truly are. He visits Sarah regularly now. They are slowly building the relationship they never had. It's not perfect. It doesn't erase the lost decades, but it's real, and it's theirs. Marcus learned something fundamental on this whole journey. Sometimes the jobs nobody wants to accept, the paths everyone avoids, the dark basements we prefer not to explore, are exactly where we find the answers we need most. He entered that mansion as a janitor, looking only to earn enough to pay the bills. He left with a complete story, a reunited mother, and a deep understanding of who he really was and where he came from. Deep within that dark basement, Marcus found not only secrets buried for 3 decades. He didn't just find a diary, old letters, or documents from a missing family. He found himself. He found the missing pieces of his own story. And he discovered that even in the most painful stories, in the hardest truths to face, there is a beauty in finally knowing, in finally understanding, in finally making peace with the past. And you, who stayed with me until the end of this story, have you ever had a discovery that completely changed your perspective on who you are or where you came from? Leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you felt this story as much as I did while telling it. Seriously, I read every comment, and I love knowing that these stories touch you the way they touch me. If this journey moved you, If you felt every twist and turn, every revelation, every moment of transformation along with Marcus, leave a like below. This shows me that this type of content, these real and profound stories, are what you want to continue seeing here. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and activate the bell, because every week I bring you stories that will make you reflect, feel and believe that life is much more incredible and mysterious than any fiction could create. And look, there's a video over here that I think you'll want to watch now. It's about another impossible discovery, another moment when someone found something they weren't looking for and it changed everything. Click and stay with me there, because we're just getting started. See you in the next video.